The wind howled through the dry Arizona plains, rattling the wooden shutters of the Beaumont ranch house. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of whiskey and sweat, the firelight casting uneasy shadows across the worn wooden floor. Eleanor Beaumont sat stiff-backed in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, her nails pressing in her palms hard enough to leave half-moon impressions. Across from her, Silas Beaumont drained the last of his drink and slammed the glass down with a force that made her flinch. He was a broad-shouldered man with a face like sun-scorched leather, the weight of his authority pressing down on the room as he exhaled. "You'll do as you're told," he said, his voice slow and heavy. "The wedding is set." Ellie lifted her chin, defiance flickering in her green eyes. "I won't marry him." Silas's gaze darkened. "You will." She had always known her father was a hard man, but tonight, something in his voice made her stomach twist. This wasn't just about control. It was about something deeper, something colder. Jed Collins leaned against the fireplace, watching her with the lazy confidence of a man who already considered her his. He was older, his face lined with years spent under the punishing desert sun, his boots dusty from the long ride in. He smelled of tobacco and sweat, and when he smiled, it never quite reached his eyes. "Best get used to the idea, Miss Ellie," he drawled. "A woman like you ain't got much choice out here." Ellie swallowed her disgust. She knew what this marriage was, a business deal. Collins had land, cattle, and men willing to do her father's bidding. In return, he would gain a wife who came with Beaumont blood and the promise of expanding his reach. Love had no place in the conversation. Silas pushed back from the table, rubbing a hand over his beard. "It's done," he said, as though that was the end of it. "The papers are drawn. You'll be wed by sundown tomorrow." Ellie's breath came short and sharp. "Tomorrow." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I won't be here." Collins chuckled, low and amused. "You planning to run, girl?" Silas moved faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist in an iron grip. "You listen to me, Eleanor. You've been given everything. This land, this name, it's yours because I allowed it. But don't think for a second you can defy me." He squeezed until her fingers tingled. "You try to run, and I'll have every man between here and the border looking for you. And when they find you, you'll wish you'd stayed put." Ellie yanked free, cradling her wrist as she fought the sting in her eyes. She turned on her heel and fled up the stairs before they could see the tears burning at the edge of her vision. The moment she reached her room, she threw the bolt across the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, the weight of her father's words crashing down around her. Tomorrow. She had one night. Her mind raced as she scanned her room. A small satchel, sturdy boots, her mother's old pistol hidden in the bottom drawer. She could be ready in minutes. But she needed a horse. Her father's men patrolled the grounds, and she wouldn't get far on foot. Ellie pulled on her coat, wrapping a scarf around her neck to guard against the cold desert air. She moved quickly, stuffing a flask of water and a handful of biscuits into her satchel before slipping through her bedroom window. The drop to the ground was harder than she expected, her ankle twisting as she landed, but she bit back the pain and forced herself forward, keeping to the shadows. The stable loomed ahead, the scent of hay and leather mingling in the cool night air. The horses stirred as she entered, their dark eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. She reached for her mare, a sleek black creature named Josie, and ran a soothing hand along her flank. A noise behind her made her freeze. "You really thought it'd be that easy?" Ellie turned slowly, her heart pounding. Jed Collins leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. He looked almost amused, but there was something dangerous in the way he stepped closer. She reached for the pistol at her hip. "I'll shoot." He smirked. "No, you won't." She fired. The shot cracked through the stable, deafening in the quiet night. Josie reared, whinnying in panic as Collins staggered back, cursing. Ellie didn't wait. She grabbed the reins and hauled herself onto the horse, kicking her into a gallop. Behind her, voices shouted. Lights flickered from the house, figures rushing toward the stable. She urged Josie faster, her breath ragged, the wind whipping her hair as they tore across the open plains. The moon hung low, silver light illuminating the rocky terrain ahead. Her father's threats echoed in her head. They would come for her. A sharp cry split the air. A rifle cracked. Josie bucked violently, and Ellie lost her grip. The ground rushed up to meet her, and then darkness. Pain was the first thing Ellie felt, a deep, throbbing ache radiating from her shoulder down her arm. The world swam in darkness, and for a long, breathless moment, she wasn't sure if she was dead. But then the scent of damp earth filled her nose, the distant crackle of firelight teased her ears, and a strange pressure wrapped around her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. She was lying on a bed of woven blankets, beneath the open sky. Towering canyon walls loomed overhead, the stars stretching wide above them like scattered embers. A faint glow pulsed from a small fire a few feet away, illuminating a man crouched beside it, his dark eyes glinting in the low light. He was silent, watching her with the patience of a predator. His face was lined, but not with age, each crease, each shadow carved from something deeper, something harder than time alone. His long black hair was tied at the nape of his neck, and around his shoulders, he wore a hide cloak that blended with the desert night. Ellie swallowed, her throat raw. She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her body, forcing a sharp gasp from her lips. Her arm bandaged. Someone had tended her wound. The man's gaze didn't waver. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Where? Her voice cracked. She licked her lips and tried again. Where am I? He didn't answer, not immediately. Instead, he reached for something beside him, a small clay bowl. He leaned forward, offering it to her. She hesitated. Drink, he said, his voice low, edged with quiet authority. Ellie's fingers trembled as she took the bowl, the warmth of it seeping into her palms. She sniffed the liquid. Bitter, earthy. She looked back at him, uncertain. He gave no reassurance, only watched. She took a cautious sip. The taste was sharp, but as it slid down her throat, warmth spread through her chest, dulling the worst of the pain. The man sat back on his heels, nodding as though satisfied. You are lucky, he said after a long silence. The bullet only grazed you. You were not far from death. Her mind scrambled to piece together the last thing she remembered. The chase, the gunshot, the fall, and then nothing. How did you find me? She asked. I heard your horse, he said simply. She ran far before she fell. Josie. Ellie's chest tightened. Is she? She is gone. A sharp breath shuddered past Ellie's lips, the weight of loss settling over her like a stone. Josie had been her last tether to home, the only soul she had trusted. Gone. She forced the grief down. She had no time for mourning. Not yet. Who are you? She asked. The man studied her for a long moment before answering. I am Geronimo. The name struck her like a thunderclap. She had heard it before, whispered in saloons, muttered in fear among the settlers. A name that carried the weight of 100 battles, of defiance carved into legend. The Apache warrior, the ghost in the desert. Ellie's breath came shallow. Geronimo tilted his head slightly, reading the fear in her eyes. You were running, he said. It wasn't a question. She clenched her jaw. I had to. He nodded, as if this answer was enough. Who hunts you? My father's men. The words felt strange on her tongue. And a man named Jed Collins. Geronimo's expression didn't change, but something in his gaze sharpened. Collins, he repeated, like the name was a knife he was testing the edge of. Ellie frowned. You know him? He's a man who takes what is not his, Geronimo said. Land, cattle, blood. Ellie shivered, not from the cold, but from the confirmation of something she had already known in her bones. She shifted, testing the limits of her injury. The pain had dulled, but her body was still weak. She had no horse, no supplies, and nowhere to go. She exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment press against her ribs. What happens now? Geronimo regarded her for a long moment before answering. You rest, he said, and then you decide. She frowned. Decide what? Whether you will run again, he said, his voice even, or whether you will fight. The words sat heavy in the air between them. Ellie looked down at her hands, tracing the faint scars along her fingers, reminders of a life spent being shaped by others. But out here, away from her father's house, away from the bars that had caged her for so long, something inside her stirred. She was tired of running. She met Geronimo's gaze. His face was unreadable, but beneath the surface, she sensed something unexpected. He was measuring her, not as a weak settler girl, not as an outsider, but as something else, something unspoken. She tightened her fingers around the clay bowl, her grip steady. "Then I'll fight," she said. Geronimo didn't smile, but he nodded once, slow and sure. And in that moment, Ellie knew her life would never be the same again. The sun bled over the horizon, spilling crimson light across the rugged Arizona landscape. Ellie crouched beside Geronimo at the mouth of the canyon, scanning the desert below. Dust rose in thick columns far in the distance. Riders, fast and unrelenting, moving with the certainty of men who knew exactly where they were going. "They found my trail," she murmured, heart pounding against her ribs. Geronimo didn't move, his gaze locked on the distant figures. "Not yet," he said, voice as steady as stone. "But they will." Ellie tightened her grip on the rifle he had given her earlier, the weight of it unfamiliar but grounding. The past day had been spent learning how to move without sound, how to listen to the wind, how to tell a man's intentions by the way he held his gun. Geronimo had taught her with few words, but every lesson had carved itself into her bones. Now, there was no time left to prepare. She turned to him. "What do we do?" He stood, adjusting the rifle slung over his shoulder. "We move." The urgency in his voice sent a spike of adrenaline through her. She didn't ask where they were going. She had learned by now that Geronimo never wasted words on what didn't matter. She followed as he led her deeper into the canyons, the jagged rocks swallowing them whole. The terrain was rough, the narrow path winding through steep walls of stone that cast deep shadows in the morning light. Ellie's breath came in sharp bursts as she struggled to keep up, every muscle in her body screaming from exhaustion. Geronimo moved like a ghost, his footsteps silent on the rocky ground. Behind them, the sound of horses grew louder. Ellie risked a glance over her shoulder and froze. A rider had broken from the pack, a lone scout pushing ahead of the others. His hat was low over his eyes, but the glint of a rifle in his hands told her everything she needed to know. Her throat went dry. "They're closer than you think." Geronimo followed her gaze, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached for the bow slung across his back. Ellie swallowed hard. "You're not going to—" The twang of the bowstring cut through the air before she could finish. The arrow streaked across the canyon, striking the rider clean in the shoulder. He cried out, dropping his rifle as he reeled back in the saddle. His horse reared, and before he could recover, he was tumbling to the ground in a cloud of dust. Ellie's breath hitched. Geronimo lowered the bow. "Now they know we are here." Panic surged through her. "Then we have to run." Geronimo shook his head. "No. Now we fight." Ellie's fingers trembled around the rifle, doubt clawing at the edges of her resolve. She had never killed a man before. Shooting in the stable had been desperation, instinct, not calculation. But now, standing at the edge of something far greater, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Geronimo's voice cut through her thoughts. "There is no turning back." She met his gaze, searching for hesitation, for second-guessing. She found none. She took a breath and nodded. They moved quickly, weaving through the canyon, positioning themselves high above the only path the riders could take. Geronimo knelt behind the rocks, motioning for Ellie to do the same. The space between them and their pursuers shrank by the second. Ellie swallowed past the dryness in her throat, forcing her body to still. She lined up the rifle, just as Geronimo had taught her. "Breathe. Steady." The first of the riders rounded the bend. A shot rang out. Ellie wasn't sure if it was hers or Geronimo's, but the result was the same. One of the men lurched in his saddle, gripping his side as his horse skidded wildly. Chaos erupted. Shouts filled the canyon as the riders scrambled for cover. Gunfire cracked through the air, ricocheting off the stone walls. Ellie ducked instinctively, her pulse hammering in her ears. Geronimo moved beside her, calm amid the storm, firing methodically, each shot precise. Ellie's fingers tightened around the trigger. She exhaled and fired. A rider fell, his hat tumbling into the dust. The others hesitated, drawing back, reassessing. Ellie's breath came fast, but beneath the fear, something else flickered, something sharp, something undeniable. She was still standing. Geronimo shifted beside her. They will not stay long. He was right. The remaining men pulled back, regrouping at the base of the canyon. They weren't retreating, they were waiting. Ellie clenched her jaw. They're not giving up. No, Geronimo agreed. But neither are we. She glanced at him, searching his face for some sign of what came next. For the first time since they met, she realized something. He wasn't just protecting her. He was teaching her how to survive. Trust had settled between them, unspoken but solid as the ground beneath their feet. Ellie set her sights on the riders below, her grip steady. They would have to fight again before the night was over. But she wasn't afraid anymore. The air was thick with the scent of dust and gunpowder. Twilight stretched long shadows across the canyon floor as Ellie adjusted her grip on the rifle, her fingers stiff and aching from the battle already fought. Below, the remaining riders had regrouped, their numbers smaller, but their determination hardened. Among them, Jed Collins sat tall in the saddle, his face half hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat. Her father's right hand. The man meant to drag her back. Jed's voice rang out, smooth as oil but sharp as a knife. Ellie girl, enough of this. You made your point. Come on back, and we'll forget all about this foolishness. Ellie's heart pounded. Every fiber of her being told her he was lying. She had known men like him all her life. Men who saw women as cattle, property to be bartered and broken. If she surrendered, she would never see freedom again. Beside her, Geronimo crouched low, eyes unreadable. He had said little since the gunfire had died down, but she didn't need words to understand his meaning. This was the moment. Jed Collins sighed, shifting in his saddle. You don't want to make me come up there, girl. He turned his gaze toward the men at his side, giving a slight nod. They began to spread out. Ellie inhaled sharply. They're trying to flank us. Geronimo nodded, already moving. He motioned toward a rock outcrop further up the canyon wall. We take the high ground. She hesitated only a second before following. They moved fast, scaling the uneven terrain as the riders advanced below. Geronimo reached the ledge first, dropping low and setting an arrow to his bowstring. Ellie pressed herself behind a boulder, leveling her rifle. Jed's men were nearly in position. Geronimo exhaled, slow and measured, before loosing an arrow. It found its mark. One of the riders tumbled from his horse with a sharp cry. Shouts erupted below. Ellie didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger, and another rider reeled back, his rifle clattering from his hands. Chaos followed. Gunfire cracked through the canyon as the riders scattered, their advantage of numbers shattered in the face of a higher position and deadly precision. Geronimo moved like a phantom, each arrow swift and sure. Ellie fought through the shaking in her limbs, her shots finding their targets with growing confidence. And then silence. The dust settled. The remaining men, those still able to, had fled into the fading light, leaving only one figure in the canyon below. Jed Collins. His horse paced nervously beneath him, nostrils flaring. He glanced at his fallen men, then up at the ridge where Ellie stood. Slowly, he dismounted, his movements deliberate, calculated. He lifted his hands, palms out. Well now, he called, voice calm but edged with something dark. You gonna kill an unarmed man? Ellie girl? Ellie's grip on the rifle tightened. She could end this. End him. Geronimo said nothing, watching her carefully. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She thought of the past days, of the chase, the desperation, the fear. Of the nights she had spent staring up at the stars, wondering if she would see another sunrise. She thought of the girl she had been when she left her father's house, and the woman she was now. Jed Collins was a cruel man, but she would not let him turn her into the same. Slowly, deliberately, Ellie lowered the rifle. "Get out," she said, voice steady. "If I ever see you again, I won't hesitate." For a long moment, Jed didn't move. Then, a slow smirk curled at the edge of his mouth. "You've got your mama's fire, I'll give you that." He turned, climbing back into the saddle. "But don't think for a second this is over." He wheeled his horse around and rode off into the gathering dusk. Ellie exhaled, her shoulders sagging under the weight of what had almost been. Geronimo watched the retreating figure until he was swallowed by the horizon. Then he turned to Ellie. "You spared a man who would not have spared you." She met his gaze, something unreadable passing between them. "Maybe, but I chose." He nodded, something like approval flickering in his dark eyes. "Then you are free." The words settled deep in her chest. She had fought, she had survived, and now, for the first time in her life, she was free to decide what came next. She looked out over the vast, untamed land before her, the wind whispering through the canyons, carrying the promise of something new. And she stepped forward.
The year was 1865, and the frontiers stretched endlessly beneath a sky too wide to hold any promises. Dust curled in the wake of wagon wheels, whispering over the golden plains as the Dawson family pressed westward. Abigail Dawson gripped the worn wood of the wagon's side, her knuckles white with effort. The sun beat down, turning the world into a great, yawning furnace, the heat licking at the skin of those foolish enough to travel beneath its watchful eye. She had not wanted this journey. Kansas had been cruel but predictable, the wooden walls of her family's home a fragile yet familiar comfort. The West was something else entirely, a wild, untamed beast that could swallow the unprepared whole. Yet her father, filled with grand notions of land and legacy, had urged them onward. They were not alone. A train of settlers stretched behind them, a slow-moving river of hopefuls, dreamers, and desperate souls. Some sought gold, some sought freedom, and others sought only the chance to live beyond the reach of a past that haunted them. Abigail didn't know which group she belonged to. All she knew was that there was no turning back. The wind carried whispers of something unseen, something that unsettled her as much as the emptiness of the land itself. She had felt it for days now, an eerie sensation of being watched. The others dismissed her nerves, but her mother, always attuned to her daughter's moods, had placed a gentle hand on her shoulder the night before. "Keep your wits about you, Abby. This land listens more than it speaks." She had nodded, though she didn't understand. But now, as she squinted against the sun's glare, she caught sight of something on the horizon, a lone figure on horseback, distant yet undeniable. The rider sat unmoving, watching. The moment she saw him, a chill ran down her spine. He was not one of theirs. The rider lingered for only a moment longer before wheeling his horse around and vanishing beyond the hills, swallowed by the land as if he had never been there at all. Abigail exhaled, trying to shake the unease curling in her gut. It was likely nothing, just one of the many natives who lived on these lands, keeping to himself. But something told her this was different. The night fell heavy and thick, a blanket of darkness wrapping around the small encampment of settlers. A fire burned low, casting flickering shapes against the wagons. Abigail sat with her family, listening to the murmur of voices and the occasional call of a night bird. The feeling of being watched had not left her. She did not sleep. When the attack came, it came without warning. Gunfire shattered the night, sharp cracks that sent men scrambling for weapons and women screaming for their children. The air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder, the metallic bite of blood. Horses reared, wagons overturned, and chaos swallowed the camp in an instant. Abigail's father shoved her toward the wagon. "Run, Abby! Get to cover!" Her feet refused to move, frozen as she watched shadows dart between the fires, figures that did not belong to the night. Men, ragged and vicious, their faces twisted with greed. These were not warriors protecting their land. These were scavengers, vultures that thrived on the weak and unsuspecting. Someone grabbed her arm. She turned with a cry, her heart hammering, but it was her mother, eyes wild. "Go!" The world spun as hands shoved her forward. Her legs finally obeyed, carrying her toward the shelter of the overturned wagon. She dropped to the ground, her breath ragged. From her hiding place, she saw her father raise his rifle, fire, and then crumple like a puppet with cut strings. Her scream died in her throat. Tears burned hot trails down her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay silent. Around her, the carnage unfolded, bodies fell, wagons burned, and the night swallowed all certainty. She did not know how long she stayed curled beneath the broken wood, trembling as footsteps stomped past her. Then, silence. The attack had passed, but it had taken everything with it. Abigail crawled out from the wreckage, her fingers shaking as they touched the ground slick with blood. Fires still burned, casting grotesque shadows over the remains of the camp. The smell of death thickened the air. She staggered to her feet, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. A sound made her turn, a rustling in the darkness, the soft tread of hooves. She reached for the knife at her belt, though she knew it would do little against whatever came next. The figure stepped into the firelight, and her grip faltered. It was him. The rider from the hills. He was Cheyenne, that much was clear, the careful beadwork on his buckskin clothing, the long black hair tied back from a face carved from stone. His eyes, dark as the void between the stars, locked onto hers. There was no threat in them, yet no kindness either. Abigail's chest rose and fell in short, sharp gasps. Were you? The words failed her. He shook his head once, slow. Then he turned his gaze to the bodies scattered around them, his expression unreadable. More figures emerged from the night, moving with silent purpose. Cheyenne warriors, their faces grave as they surveyed the scene. They had not been the attackers, but they were here now, drawn to the scent of spilled blood. Abigail took a step back, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had heard stories of what happened to white women taken by native warriors, and though she did not know if they were true, she had no intention of finding out. The man before her studied her for a long moment, then spoke. "You are alone." The statement was simple, yet it cut through her like a blade. She swallowed hard. "Yes." He glanced toward the horizon, where dawn's first light bled into the sky. Then he nodded once more, as if making a decision. "You will come with me." Her body stiffened. "No, I can't. You will not survive here." His voice was calm, but there was something final in it, something that left no room for argument. She hesitated, the weight of the night pressing down on her. He was right. The outlaws might return. The wilderness would swallow her whole. She had no food, no weapons beyond her pitiful knife. Still, her lips parted to refuse. Then she looked at the bodies again. At her father, lying cold beneath the dawn. At the nothingness that stretched before her. And she nodded. The man turned without another word, leading his horse forward. One of his warriors helped her onto another. She did not look back. As they rode into the breaking dawn, the wind carried the last whispers of smoke from the ruined camp, curling into the sky like ghosts of the lost. The ride stretched long into the morning, the endless plains swallowing them whole. Abigail's fingers curled around the reins of the unfamiliar horse, her knuckles white from the strain of balance and fear. The man who had taken her, or saved her, rode ahead, silent as the wind, his dark hair lifting with each gust. The other warriors trailed behind, speaking in low voices, their expressions unreadable. She had no idea where they were going. Each passing mile pulled her farther from everything she had ever known. The burning wreckage of her past lay behind her, and before her, only uncertainty. Her body ached from the unrelenting motion of the horse, her skirts stiff with dried blood and dust. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she did not ask for food. Her throat was parched, lips cracked from the wind, but she did not ask for water. She would not let them see her as weak. By midday, they reached the shelter of a narrow ravine, where a thin stream cut through the rocks like a silver scar. The warriors dismounted, moving with quiet efficiency, and she followed their lead, slipping from the saddle with shaking legs. Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright. She would not fall. The Cheyenne chief, she knew now that he was a leader among them, approached her. His gaze swept over her, assessing, unreadable as ever. "Drink," he said, motioning toward the stream. She hesitated. Not because she distrusted the water, but because she distrusted everything else. Was she his prisoner? His burden? His responsibility? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure which answer would frighten her more. But thirst won out over stubbornness. She knelt at the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid in trembling hands and drinking deep. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. The men moved around her, tending to their horses, speaking to each other in a language she could not understand. She felt their eyes on her, some curious, some wary. She was an outsider in every possible way. When she finally pulled away from the water, the chief was still watching her. "What is your name?" His voice was low, steady. She swallowed hard. "Abigail." He nodded. "I am Chaitin." The names settled between them, a fragile bridge spanning an impossible divide. She did not thank him. She was not sure if she was meant to. Instead, she turned her gaze to the land stretching ahead. "Where are you taking me?" "To my people," he said simply. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She knew what settlers said about women taken by natives, whispers spoken in firelight, in hushed, warning tones. But she also knew what had waited for her had she stayed behind: death, or worse. Chaitin gave her no reassurances, no explanations. He simply turned and walked back toward his horse. The conversation was over. They rode again, deeper into the wilderness, and the land changed around them. The golden plains gave way to hills, the air cooler beneath the shade of towering pines. The scent of earth and wildflowers drifted in the breeze, mingling with the distant call of unseen creatures. It should have been peaceful, but Abigail could not relax. She was a stranger in a world that did not belong to her. As dusk settled, the group stopped in a grove of trees, where the ground was soft and the air hummed with the distant murmur of crickets. The warriors made camp with practiced ease, gathering wood, tending to their horses, preparing food. No one spoke to her. She sat apart from them, wrapping her arms around herself as the first bite of evening chill crept into her bones. The adrenaline of survival had begun to fade, and exhaustion settled in its place. A shadow fell over her. She looked up to find Chaitin standing before her, a bundle in his hands. Without a word, he set it down beside her, a folded blanket and a small piece of roasted meat wrapped in leaves. Then he turned and walked away. For a moment, she simply stared at the offering. Then hunger overcame pride, and she reached for the food. The meat was rich and smoky, unlike anything she had ever tasted, but she ate every bite. The fire crackled, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow over the gathered men. She watched them from the corner of her eye, how they moved, how they spoke. Some laughed in quiet tones, others sharpened weapons or mended clothing. They were not savages, not monsters. They were simply men. And Chaitin, he was something else entirely. She had never known a man like him. He commanded with few words, and when he spoke, the others listened. There was strength in him, but not cruelty. He had not hurt her, had not threatened her, had not treated her as less than any of the others. And yet, she did not trust him. That night, she lay awake beneath the blanket he had given her, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. Sleep tugged at her, but every rustling leaf, every distant howl, set her nerves on edge. Then, a noise too close, a shift in the brush beyond the trees. Her breath caught. Was it an animal? A bandit? Another enemy lurking in the darkness? She sat up, fingers reaching instinctively for the small knife at her belt. Before she could move, a hand clamped gently over her wrist. Chaitin knelt beside her, his face barely visible in the dim light. "Be still." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "What is it?" He listened for a moment longer, then shook his head. "Only the wind." She did not believe him. But his hand remained on her wrist, his grip neither harsh nor comforting, merely firm. It was the first time he had touched her, and the warmth of his skin startled her more than the fear that had gripped her moments before. Slowly, he let go. "Sleep," he said. Then he was gone, retreating into the darkness like a shadow dissolving into the night. Abigail lay back down, her heart still unsteady in her chest. The fire crackled, the wind sighed through the trees, and above it all, the question she had refused to ask herself lingered in the air. Was she his captive? Or had he saved her? She did not know. But for the first time since the attack, she closed her eyes, and she slept. The days bled together, marked only by the endless rhythm of riding, stopping, and moving again. Abigail learned quickly how to stay in the saddle without falling, how to drink sparingly when water was scarce, how to move with the group instead of against it. But the deeper they traveled into the unknown, the more the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her. She did not know what awaited her at the end of this journey. She did not know what would become of her once they reached Chaitin's people. And yet, with every mile, the fear that had gripped her so tightly began to shift, not disappearing, but changing shape. She was still afraid. But not of him. Chaitin spoke little to her, but when he did, she listened. He was a man of few words, but his presence carried weight. She watched the way the others deferred to him, the way he moved with quiet certainty, the way he studied the land like it spoke to him in ways she could never understand. She had never met a man like him. The shift came one evening, sudden and unbidden. They had stopped by a river, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The warriors tended to their horses, their voices low, carrying in the hush of dusk. Abigail knelt at the water's edge, washing the dust from her face and hands, when she felt eyes on her. She looked up to find Chaitin watching her from where he crouched a few feet away, sharpening the blade of his knife. The firelight flickered over the planes of his face, turning his expression unreadable. "You are not as afraid as you were," he said. She wasn't sure if it was a question or a statement. She hesitated before answering. "Should I be?" His gaze held hers for a long moment before he returned to his knife. "Fear is not always weakness," he said. "But letting it rule you is." She swallowed, unsure how to respond. It was the longest conversation they had shared, and it left her feeling unsteady. That night, as she lay beneath the open sky, she realized she had not thought of running in days. The idea had not disappeared, but it no longer consumed her. She did not know what that meant. The test came without warning. They had been riding through the thick of the forest when the first arrow struck. The horse beside Abigail reared back, its rider tumbling to the ground with a sharp cry. Chaos erupted in an instant, shouts, the thunder of hooves, the sharp whistle of arrows cutting through the trees. Ambush! Abigail's horse jerked beneath her, panicked. She grabbed at the reins, heart hammering. Chaitin was already moving, his voice sharp as he barked orders to his men. A second arrow sliced through the air, missing her by inches. A man appeared from the brush, his face painted, his eyes wild with battle. He raised a weapon, and before she could think, before she could react, she felt her body move on instinct. She pulled the knife from her belt. The man lunged. She barely saw Chaitin move, but suddenly he was there. His blade flashed in the dim light, fast and deadly. The man crumpled before he could reach her, a strangled sound escaping his lips. Abigail stared, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The scent of blood hit her, sharp and metallic. Chaitin grabbed her arm. "Ride." She did. The next moments were a blur of motion, shouts, the crash of bodies through the underbrush. She did not know how long the attack lasted, only that when it was over, silence fell like a weight over the forest. The attackers had fled. The warriors gathered, counting their losses. 2 men dead. Another injured. Abigail slid from her horse, her legs trembling. She felt the heat of eyes on her, but she could not look away from the blood on her hands. It was not hers, but it might as well have been. She had nearly died. Again. Chaitin stepped in front of her, his expression unreadable. "You did not run." She looked up at him, something sharp and unspoken passing between them. "Where would I go?" He studied her, then nodded. She had answered truthfully, but it was not the full truth. She had not run because she had not wanted to, and that terrified her more than anything else. The wind carried the scent of rain as they rode deeper into the valley, the sky bruised with the promise of a coming storm. Abigail could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, like the land itself was holding its breath. The battle days before had shaken them all, and though they had left the dead behind, the weight of loss still clung to the group like a shadow. Chaitin had said little since the attack, but she could see the change in him. His shoulders carried a burden heavier than leadership, his gaze sharper, searching. He was a man who had spent his life measuring danger, reading the land, preparing for what lay ahead. But something about this, about her, had shifted the balance. She had felt it, too. She no longer saw herself as a prisoner, nor did she cling to the desperate idea of escape. Somewhere along the road, between blood and fire, she had begun to belong to this journey, even if she did not yet understand what that meant. But belonging came with a price. The storm broke as they neared the base of the mountains, rain slashing through the trees in heavy sheets. Abigail pulled her cloak tighter, the cold seeping through the fabric, but the others rode on without pause. This was not a storm that would slow them. She had grown used to the hardship. The ache in her muscles no longer made her weak. The hunger, the exhaustion, the constant uncertainty, these things had carved something new inside her. She had survived things she once believed would break her. But survival was not the same as trust. That trust was tested when the riders came. She heard the warning first, a sharp whistle from one of Chaitin's men, barely audible over the storm. Then the dark shapes emerged from the trees, fast and unforgiving, moving with the precision of men who had done this before. There was no time to speak, no time to question. Chaitin's voice cut through the chaos, a single word: go. The warriors broke into motion, splitting off to draw the attackers away. But Abigail was not a warrior. She was a woman alone, caught between forces greater than herself. And as the first gunshot rang out, she made her choice. She turned her horse and fled. Branches clawed at her as she urged the animal forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to move. The sound of pursuit thundered behind her, hooves pounding, voices shouting. And then, she was falling. The horse reared, startled by something unseen, and the world spun as she tumbled from the saddle. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, pain exploding through her ribs. She tried to rise, but the sound of footsteps froze her. A man loomed over her, his face half hidden by the rain. His hand went to the knife at his belt. Abigail did not think. She did not have time to. Her fingers closed around a fallen branch, and she swung. The strike landed hard against his temple, and he staggered, cursing. She scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, her vision blurred by rain and fear. He was dazed, but not enough. He lunged for her again. And then, he stopped. A blade jutted from his chest, deep and merciless. Chaitin stood behind him, his face unreadable as he withdrew the knife, letting the man crumple to the earth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain beat down, washing away the blood, the fear, the moment itself. Then Chaitin turned to her, and in his gaze, she saw what she had not dared to believe. "You are not weak," he said. The words cut deeper than the knife. She had spent her life being told who she was: daughter, settler, burden. She had been shaped by expectation, by survival, by loss. But here, in the heart of the storm, she was something else. She was still breathing, still fighting. And for the first time, she did not feel afraid. She met his gaze and nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. This was not the end of the road. It was only the beginning. The year was 1865, and the land stretched wide and merciless beneath a sky painted in hues of fire and dust. The frontier belonged to no man, yet blood was its inheritance. The Apache and the Comanche, two mighty nations carved from the bone of the earth, warred over it like rival wolves, each unwilling to surrender even a breath of wind to the other. Taza moved like a shadow through the jagged cliffs, his moccasins silent against the hardened ground. The scent of smoke drifted on the wind, a campfire small but present. His jaw tightened. A scouting party? Or worse, a raiding group deep in Apache territory? He pressed a palm against the earth. Warm. Recent. Someone was close. His grip tightened around his spear as he crept forward, muscles coiled for the strike. Through the tangle of mesquite and yucca, he spotted her. She knelt by a trickling creek, her fingers trailing through the water, face half lit by the dying light of dusk. A Comanche. Her braids were bound in red cord, the mark of a warrior's daughter. Iona. He knew her name, whispers of her fierceness carried on the wind from traders and warriors alike. For a moment, he hesitated. Taza had seen her before, across battlefields, a phantom slipping through the chaos, never falling, never caught. Her people had burned Apache villages. His people had returned the favor in kind. Yet here she was, alone, vulnerable, unaware of the predator in the brush. Ayana's hand closed around a blade at her waist. Her body tensed. "You are not as quiet as you think, Apache." Taza stepped forward, revealing himself, spear lowered but ready. "And you are too far from home, Comanche?" Ayana rose with deliberate slowness, tilting her head in challenge. "Home is where I walk, where I fight. This land knows no borders but those drawn in the minds of men." Taza's expression remained unreadable. He had been raised to see Comanche as enemies, thieves of land, takers of life. Yet there was no fear in her eyes, no hatred either, only certainty, as if she belonged to the wind itself. "Why are you here?" he asked. She did not answer. Distant hooves pounded against the earth. Taza turned sharply. The rhythm was wrong, too heavy for Apache, too fast for Comanche. Settlers. He recognized the sound of their wagons, their untrained horses. Ayana moved first, darting toward the thicket, but she stopped short. A half-dozen riders emerged from the shadows, rifles raised, their faces burned by the sun and hardened by the frontier's cruelty. Not Apache, not Comanche, men who killed for the simple pleasure of it. Ayana's blade was already in her hand. Taza met her gaze. A silent agreement passed between them. Then the first shot rang out. Ayana dove left, Taza right. A bullet split the air where she had stood a moment before, splintering the bark of an ancient oak. Dust kicked up as hooves thundered closer. Taza rolled to his feet, launching his spear. It struck true, burying deep into the chest of a raider still gripping his reins. The man's scream was lost beneath the wild cry of his horse as it bucked. Ayana was a blur of motion, weaving between the trees, her knife flashing. A man lunged at her with a rifle, but she twisted, driving her blade into his side before yanking it free in a single, ruthless motion. Another shot. Taza spun, too slow. A blow struck his ribs, white-hot pain tearing through him. He staggered but did not fall. Ayana was beside him in an instant, pressing a hand to his wound. Her fingers came away red. They had no time. The raiders regrouped, circling like vultures scenting fresh death. "We cannot stay," Ayana said, her breath quick but steady. Taza gritted his teeth, forcing his body to obey. The two warriors moved as one, sprinting into the wilderness, the night swallowing them whole. Behind them, the raiders gave chase. They ran until their lungs burned, until the howls of their hunters faded into the wind. Only when they reached the deep shelter of the canyons did they stop, their bodies heaving, their hands still stained with battle. Ayana turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Why did you not let me die?" Taza did not answer. Because in that moment, in the chaos of gunfire and steel, he had not seen an enemy. He had seen something else, and it terrified him. The night swallowed them, vast and merciless. Wind rushed through the canyons, carrying the distant howls of their pursuers. Taza moved first, leading Ayana deeper into the labyrinth of stone, his steps steady despite the wound blooming red beneath his ribs. She followed without question, her own breath sharp and measured, her blade still clutched in her hand. For hours they ran, past twisted junipers, over crumbling ledges, through the gnarled arms of the desert. Only when the stars were high and the land had silenced did they stop. Taza leaned against a boulder, pressing a palm to his side. Warm blood seeped between his fingers. Ayana crouched beside him, her dark eyes assessing. He expected a sneer, a cutting remark about his weakness. Instead, she pulled a leather pouch from her belt, the scent of crushed herbs drifting between them. "You will not last the night like this," she murmured. He grunted but said nothing as she tore a strip from her tunic and pressed it against the wound. Her hands were steady, her touch firm. She worked quickly, packing the cut with bitter-smelling leaves before binding it. He watched her, noting the ease with which she moved, the certainty in her fingers. This was not a girl raised in the safety of lodges and ceremonies. She knew pain, understood survival. Finished, she sat back on her heels. It will hold? Taza flexed his fingers, testing the makeshift bandage. Where did you learn this? Iona glanced away. From the women of my village. From the old ones who whisper their wisdom in secret, so the men do not hear. Silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The land had settled, but they both knew it would not last. Taza stood. We must move. They pressed on, their path weaving through the canyon's depths. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and sage, the moon casting jagged shadows along the walls. Above them, the sky stretched endless and watchful, offering no comfort. By dawn, they reached the edge of a vast river. The water rushed wild and frothing, swollen from the rains, its current fierce enough to strip flesh from bone. Iona exhaled. There is no way around. Taza studied the river, then the cliffs beyond. The only way forward was through. He glanced at her. Can you swim? She lifted her chin. Can you? Without waiting for an answer, she stepped into the water. A sharp gasp left her lips as the cold bit deep, but she did not hesitate. Taza followed, the ache in his ribs sharpening with each movement. The current seized them instantly. They fought against it, muscles straining, the roar of the river drowning their breath. Taza surged forward, carving a path through the chaos, but Iona was smaller, the water pulling her down. She gasped, eyes wild, and in an instant, Taza was beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist. He kicked hard, forcing them upward, pushing toward the far shore. The river fought back, but he did not let go. At last, the current spat them out, throwing them onto the rocky bank. Iona coughed, water streaming from her lips, her body trembling with cold. Taza lay beside her, his chest heaving. After a moment, she turned her head, meeting his gaze. You could have let me drown. He held her stare. And yet you still think I am the one who needs saving. A flicker of something passed over her face. Not quite anger, not quite understanding. She said nothing. They rested only long enough to regain their strength, then pressed on, hunger gnawing at their bellies. The land changed as they moved, grasses thickened, the earth softened, the sky deepened with the promise of dusk. But danger never strayed far. By nightfall, they found shelter beneath an overhang of rock, a small hollow carved by time and wind. Iona gathered dried brush, her hands moving swiftly, efficiently. Taza struck flint against stone. Sparks danced. The fire caught. Light flickered between them, casting shadows against the rock. Iona pulled her knees to her chest. Where will you go? Taza looked to the flames. South. She nodded, as if she had expected this. And when your people see you with me, what then? The question hung between them, heavy and unspoken. She was Comanche. He was Apache. Their histories were written in blood, their paths never meant to cross, and yet here they were, bound by survival, by fate. Taza exhaled. We reach morning first. Iona's lips pressed together. The fire crackled. The night stretched long and quiet. Above them, the stars wheeled, indifferent to the two souls beneath. The morning arrived with an eerie stillness, the kind that settled before a storm. The fire had died to a whisper of embers, and the scent of damp earth clung to the air. Taza woke first, his instincts sharpened by a lifetime of war and survival. He listened. No wind, no birdsong, only the steady breathing of Iona beside him. For a moment, he watched her. In the fire's dying glow, she seemed untouched by the violence of the past days. But he knew better. He had seen the fire in her, the steel beneath the quiet exterior. She stirred, dark eyes meeting his, as if she had sensed his gaze. We should move? Taza nodded. He rose, testing the ache in his ribs, then adjusted the binding she had made. It held. Barely. They gathered what little they had, setting off through the thickening landscape. The trees stretched taller here, offering more places to hide, but also more places for enemies to lurk. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley, a stretch of land golden under the sun's sharp light. Smoke curled in the distance, thin and gray. A settlement. Ayanna stiffened beside him. Taza followed her gaze and knew instantly. This was not some settler's camp. This was Comanche. His jaw tightened. They were too close, too exposed. He turned, ready to move back into the cover of the trees, but Ayanna did not follow. "You knew where we were going," she said. Taza's hands curled into fists. "We cannot stay here." But her stance had changed. No longer wary, no longer on guard. The fire in her eyes had cooled into something unreadable. Before he could move, the arrow came. A sharp whistle through the air, then pain, white-hot, searing. Taza staggered, clutching his shoulder. His vision blurred. The ground tilted. He fell to one knee, breath ragged. Through the haze, he saw them emerge from the brush, Comanche warriors, bows still raised, faces carved in stone. And Ayanna stood among them. Betrayal struck deeper than the arrow lodged in his flesh. She did not speak, did not meet his eyes. One of the warriors yanked him to his feet, tearing the arrow from his shoulder. A fresh wave of agony threatened to drag him under, but he stayed upright. He would not fall before them. Ayanna finally turned. "This is my home, Taza." Her voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than any battle cry. It always was. He stared at her, waiting for something, an explanation, a flicker of regret, anything that would dull the blade now buried in his chest. But she had already turned away. The warriors dragged him forward, their grips iron, their intentions clear. He was no longer a reluctant ally in a fight for survival. He was a prisoner, and Ayanna had led him here. The warriors dragged him through the Comanche village, his feet kicking up dust as the eyes of men, women, and children followed. Their expressions were unreadable, some wary, some curious, others filled with quiet satisfaction at the sight of an enemy in chains. The weight of the bindings around his wrists bit into his skin, but the pain in his shoulder was worse, each movement sending fresh waves of fire through his body. Taza held his head high. He would not cower. They brought him before the chief, an older man with sharp eyes that had seen decades of war. He sat upon a woven mat, his expression calm but knowing. Ayanna stood beside him, her posture rigid, her face a mask of indifference. "You traveled with this Apache," the chief said, his voice measured. "Yet you bring him here, bound like an offering." Ayanna met his gaze, her voice steady. "He is not an offering. He is a warrior. He came into our lands. He killed to survive. He belongs to us now." Taza said nothing. He did not plead. If she expected him to beg for his life, she would be disappointed. The chief studied him for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the center of the village. "At sundown, he will fight." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Taza knew what this meant. A battle to the death. If he won, perhaps he would be granted a swift end. If he lost, his body would be left for the scavengers. The warriors dragged him away, pushing him into a hut that smelled of earth and fire. The door was covered with thick pelts, blocking his escape. He let his head rest against the cool wall, breathing through the pain. His body was broken, but his spirit was not. Hours passed. The sun sank lower. Then, a shadow moved across the entrance. Ayanna. She slipped inside, silent as falling snow. He did not look at her. "You should eat," she said, setting down a small wooden bowl of roasted corn and dried meat. Taza scoffed. "A last meal?" Her jaw tightened. "You do not have to die here." He turned his head, meeting her eyes. "You made certain I would." A flicker of something, regret, doubt, shame, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. "I did what I had to," she whispered. Taza exhaled sharply. "And now you come to soothe your conscience?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There is a way out." He went still. "They expect you to die," she continued. They expect you to fight a man who has been trained his whole life for battle. But if you run, tonight, before the fight begins, you have a chance." Taza studied her, searching for deception. But she was not lying. "You would betray your people for me?" he asked. Ayana looked away. "I already have." Silence hung between them, heavier than before. Then, she moved quickly, slicing through the bindings on his wrists with a small obsidian blade. "Go," she whispered. Taza hesitated for only a breath. Then he slipped into the shadows, vanishing into the night. Behind him, Ayana stood alone, watching as he disappeared into the darkness, knowing she had chosen him, and knowing the cost.